Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining today's event on Tech for Integrity. My name is Ed Olowokere. I'm the Global Director of Governance at the World Bank Group. I would like to start this session, which is part of our program to mark this year's International Anti-Corruption Day, by paying tribute to former World Bank President Jim Wolfenson, who recently passed away. As you may know, Jim put corruption squarely on the World Bank's development policy agenda. To quote from his famous speech that you all have heard about, some words, and let's not mince words. We need to deal with the cancer of corruption. In country after country, it is the people who are demanding action on this issue. They know that corruption diverts resources from the poor to the rich, increases the cost of running businesses, distorts public expenditures, and deters foreign investors. They also know that it erodes the constituency for aid programs and humanitarian relief. And we all know that it is a major barrier to sound and equitable development. Unquote from our President Jim Wolfenson. Today, we are going to focus on the question of how to tackle corruption. In particular, how to make the most of technological advances that we are witnessing. The pace of technological change continues to impact so many aspects of the lives of people around the world. And its value became even more apparent as countries wrestle with lockdowns, social distancing, and the need for rapid flow of public health information. Innovative applications of technology are everywhere, including in the public sector. But what about controlling corruption? Has innovation in the use of technology to prevent and detect corruption kept pace? How are technology approaches to corruption evolving? And what are the opportunities? Today, I'm honored to be here with a distinguished panel of speakers. We have Natalie, Deputy Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine. Prior to our position in government, Natalie worked as a technical advisor for the COST International Secretariat and as country manager for COST Ukraine. We also have Alan Gibson, Assistant General Counsel of Microsoft's Compliance and Ethics team. Alan manages Microsoft's Global Compliance Program. Emma Prest, Chief Technology Officer, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP. As Chief Technology Officer, Emma oversees the data, technology, and research teams. I would like to welcome Natalie, Alan, and Emma. Thanks for joining us today. We also have with us Jim Anderson, Global Lead on Anti-Corruption, World Bank. Jim currently leads our anti-corruption work in the governance global practice. In this session, we will be focusing on innovative tools, solutions, and approaches to help control corruption, and exploring how these tools, solutions, and approaches can help control corruption at the country level. For those who just joined us, again, I would like to introduce myself. I am Ed Olowokere, Global Director for Governance at the World Bank Group. Let's start today's conversation by asking Alan about some of the work that Microsoft is doing. Alan, how is Microsoft using technology to manage corruption risk? Could you also describe the journey to using more technology to control corruption? Over to you, Alan.
Great, thank you, and greetings. Really appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to sit on this panel. I'm excited to discuss how Microsoft is using technology to manage its own corruption risk. I'm also excited to learn from my co-panelists while also learning what's top of mind from the audience. As Ed mentioned, I'm Alan Gibson. I've been at Microsoft for 17 years, working in a wide variety of roles. Over the last 5 years, I've really been focused on being a change agent and applying digital solutions to modernize first how Microsoft and now other companies and NGOs, IGOs, and governments can use technology to manage their compliance risks and specifically their corruption risk. So now imagine it's late in your workday and you're finishing a memo or a report, or you've just provided some guidance to an organizational leader when your phone rings or an email pops up on your computer. And on it says, we have questions about a contract that you entered into with X, or we're interested in learning more about your relationship with third party. After responding as you deem appropriate, you set down your device and you ask yourself, how did this happen? How did we get into this situation? Where I think, or we think, really what you should be asking is, how did we not know that it was happening? Interestingly, the root cause of many of these challenges may also be the potential solution: data. Data is generated by virtually limitless sources, and the pace of data growth is only increasing. With all of this data, the challenge that organizations face is not just how to deal with the volume of the data, it's also finding ways to generate actionable insights from that data. That's really how organizations can better manage their risks, including their corruption risk. But there's a challenge. The systems that generate or ingest that data actually trap the data. I can speak from personal experience. Microsoft has historically reviewed our sales contracts looking for potential misconduct. But what we found is that information about contracts, third parties, discounts, incentives, all resided in separate systems. It was tough for anyone to get an end-to-end view of any one sales transaction or a third-party relationship. So there were signals hidden in the data that may have indicated that our risk of corruption was increasing. So the questions are, how can organizations free themselves from these data silos that plague them? And two, how can an organization extract more value from its data after it breaks down these silos? In other words, how can a compliance department or an organization connect data from across systems, leverage intelligence, and derive insights so data from one system can be used to optimize the outcome or process with another? To answer that, Microsoft has oriented itself around this concept of compliance analytics. With data and really intelligence at its core, this is how a compliance function could unlock actionable insights. For Microsoft, we're trying to leverage our data to create an early warning and monitoring system for our corruption risk. Now, have we reached the end of this journey? No. But we've started to ingest a lot of data into an end-to-end solution that has allowed us to move from using analytics to simply monitor for non-compliance, or to monitor for corruption, to identifying, predicting, and prioritizing our risks, allocating our finite compliance resources to manage these risks. And finally, what we consider the special sauce is operationalizing management of these risks by actually building the analytics into our business processes, our workflows. So in combination, this empowers our compliance professionals specifically, and all of our employees more broadly, to make better decisions and act accordingly. But when we take a step back, what are we actually doing? This slide is a generic example of what a compliance analytics program could look like. We talk about it as proactive corruption risk analytics solutions. that we use to identify what's risky, describe why it's risky, and what we need to do to manage that corruption risk that we've identified. So what does that mean? We've aggregated data from across Microsoft, which is nearly 50 IT systems and data sources representing about 80 terabytes of data. We've ingested this data into a compliance data lake where we're able to run algorithms. But this isn't where we started. We gradually built these solutions over the last 5 years. Don't let it scare you with the numbers that I talk about, 40 systems, 80 terabytes of data. We actually started with 3 or 4 data sources and gradually grew that to 10, to 20, and beyond. Today, we use advanced statistics, machine learning, and AI to identify and predict scenarios which create an increased risk of corruption through an application of nearly 100 quantitative risk models. At Microsoft, we're focused on 2 main scenarios. First, identifying and predicting which of our sales contracts create the most corruption risk for Microsoft. The way we do this is by creating a risk score. Each contract that we process using this compliance data lake or these proactive risk analytics gets risk scored on a scale of 0 to 100, and above a certain risk threshold, it gets routed for additional compliance oversight. When a price quote is requested in our CRM or our sales management system, a call is automatically made to our compliance data lake where this risk score is generated. If it scores highly, it gets routed for additional compliance oversight before it gets approved for processing. We continue to use the tech in the background to monitor all of our sales contracts. Second, we take a similar approach with our third parties, specifically our channel partners, our reselling partners. When we onboard a new channel partner or renew an agreement with them, we create a risk score in a similar fashion. The risk score determines the amount of additional compliance oversight the third party receives. People ask me all the time about the types of data that we ingest into our system to calculate these risk scores. We use traditional due diligence reports, Kroll, Dow Jones, Steele, and supplement that with additional information that we generate through our anti-corruption questionnaires. Similar process to what a lot of people do on this call. But then what we do is we supplement all of that data to measure the amount of risk that's being created by our relationship with that third party. We also factor in local business conditions. Again, what's driving all of this analysis is the inflows and outflows of money from Microsoft and what we know about the relationship and the relationships that the third parties have with which we do business. We're looking for trends, patterns, relationships, and outliers or anomalies. Now, the application of the data analytics and machine learning is amazing, but it's only part of the story. Internally, we've worked to integrate the application of the analytics into the business processes and workflows. We then operationalize the review of high-risk contracts and third parties through a series of dashboards and online tools to reduce our compliance risks. Again, the solution identifies what's risky, why it's risky, and what to do to manage that risk. It's important to highlight that the insights that we create that drive the actions are based on these ideas of and principles of interpretability and transparency. We don't put a contract into a black box and then spit it out and say, this has a high risk of corruption or a bribe is likely paid in the sales contract. We identify why we believe that it is risky and the specific steps we need to take to mitigate that risk. So this is crucial to how we go from data to insight to action. This isn't just business intelligence or data visualization. Instead, we're integrating analytics into our business processes to help prevent corruption risks from becoming issues. I've talked a lot about our sales contracts and how we work with our channel partners, but these sorts of technologies are broadly applicable. As I think back about 7, 8 minutes, Ed mentioned it's like you're Microsoft. You have all of these resources. How do other people get started on this type of journey? And again, this is broadly applicable. I described our journey or where we stand on our journey. This isn't meant to be a sales slide, but when we sit down with customers, we paint this portrait of it's not a master move that you're taking with technology. It's a journey. It's a crawl, walk, run approach to what you're doing. So this is a 3-horizon view. It's about assessing where you want to go in the future while also addressing the challenges you have today. Horizon 1, or where a lot of governments or companies may be, is about establishing a foundation. On this slide, I call it modernization. And it's to get the sort of capabilities that I just described. You need to ensure that you have the foundation built. On this horizon, the capabilities and use cases may not be super exciting and as interesting as Microsoft's application right now, but they allow you to take that step to start solving important issues. They start to establish transparency, oversight, and accountability. And then as you work your way up through the other horizons, it's about leveraging that foundation in Horizon 2, taking advantage of the increased amount of data that you have, building on the capabilities you've established while offering more tangible results. And then finally, on Horizon 3, it's about transforming your organization, your company, your government, and how it delivers services to citizens, to customers. I think about it as stitching all of the solutions together and putting them on a common platform and really allowing people to enable new experiences for their customers and citizens. Now, before I hand it off, just remember, you can't run if you can't crawl. You need to start thinking about how you build these foundational capabilities. Focusing on them now will pay big dividends later. So Ed, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Next, I would like to turn to Emma. As CTO of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, you see technology from a different perspective. So Emma, can you tell us about how you use technology as a media-related organization?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you, Alan. I think you really nicely teed up what I'm going to say here, because maybe some of what we've been doing is not dissimilar. So I work at OCCRP, not a household name like Microsoft. We are the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and we are a network of investigative journalists. And so we work to expose kind of grand corruption, money laundering. We've done a series of investigations on what we call laundromats, which are massive financial vehicles for moving money illicitly across borders in places like Russia and Azerbaijan. So that's really the meat of our work. We do these big kind of 6 to 9 month investigations with a bunch of our media partners and member centers. What's actually interesting about the way OCCRP is set up is that we are set up to almost mirror how organized crime works, and that we have trusted people and partners in all kinds of jurisdictions across the world in a very distributed model, so we can kind of in an agile way respond to what we're seeing. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to do what we call follow the money investigations, right? We're tracking down people, companies, assets. We want to know about boats and ships and property. As people are moving money illicitly across borders, they are leaving digital traces, right? And there are bits of information that we're trying to hoover up. So I'm going to talk a bit about the technology we've built to help us follow the money in our anti-corruption work. And I'll also try and squeeze in a little bit about digital security, because that's, again, a kind of very tech-heavy part of our work, and I was asked to include it, so I will mention it. So if you think that we want data on company ownership, right? Ideally beneficial ownership, who owns what, where are the properties, procurement information, who's buying what from government. Some of that is open, some of that we can get. So we run something like 200 scrapers every week. We are scraping websites to get that data. On the other hand, this is 2020, this is journalism, and we get a fair few leaks, right? We get leaks of politicians' inboxes, thousands and thousands of bank transactions, company servers, right? And these are sizable leaks that will contain thousands and thousands and thousands of documents that a journalist or a team of journalists cannot realistically read and sift through and make sense, right? So where this leaves us is an information management problem, frankly. We've got too much information that we can't sift through, and we don't know how to find the key connections between the people and the companies. And so at OCCRP, we built a data platform called Aleph, A-L-E-P-H. And this is, if you can go and look at it right now, it has a small portion of the very safe data that is available to the public. And then a lot of our data is obviously under lock and key because it is incredibly sensitive and relates to specific investigations. But what this technology is doing, as Alan said, right, it's pooling everything into one place, and it can be a whole array of data. So it's documents and PowerPoints and Excel, and we're running entity extraction over it. So we're pulling out the names of the people and companies. And then what we're able to do is cross-reference that and compare those lists of names and companies, say from a leak, with the other data we hold, so we can start seeing where else it appears. You know, what property registries does the president's son-in-law abroad seem to own, or whatever it might be. That those are the kinds of things we're looking for. And so we've built what is a data archive, a search tool, and increasingly a more collaborative workspace where the journalists can build network diagrams to show how things fit together. So I think what's quite interesting for us is, as an NGO, we do not have the resources of something like Microsoft, but we've managed to build software that is open source and that is being picked up by a lot of other institutions. An obscure bit of the UN is using Aleph. Mainstream media partners are using Aleph. We've got a lot of NGOs like Global Witness using Aleph. And so they're not using our data, they are using it to manage their own internal data and investigations. And then the other aspect I wanted to quickly touch on was more around digital security. So given the nature of the work we do at OCCRP, we have reporters in high-risk countries reporting on the most powerful people, right? And so for us, their safety is paramount. They are honestly under very real threat. They are being surveilled. You know, for all we know, the oligarch they are investigating owns a telco company. And so one of the essential parts of for us is encrypted communication, right? So we use the Signal app, we use PGP email, that having encryption is a prerequisite to doing investigative journalism in a lot of the environments we work in. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the technology we build, but also some of the key tech that we rely on to do our work. So that is it, short and succinct, I hope. Back to you, Ed.
Thank you so much, Emma. Natalie, let's now turn to you. You bring a somewhat unique perspective, that of the government official who was previously developing technological tools for civil society. So can you tell us about how you are using technology to control corruption? Natalie.
Yes, thank you very much. Do you hear me well? No?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, in my past 1 year ago, I was country manager for post-construction sector transparency initiative, which was doing the monitoring of the road construction services in Ukraine. And the job was done that well that I was invited by the new government to join the Ministry of Infrastructure. But today I want to give kind of short overview of different tools that are available from the governmental side, because I can't really speak anymore on the side of civil society. In this respect, I must admit that obviously Ukraine is one of the most transparent countries, and we have a very big amount of data open already in various sectors and in various slices, I would say. But of course, according to TI, Corruption Perception Index, we are still considered to be a highly risky country in terms of corruption. And this is a kind of contradiction which really exists, and probably there are few challenges to overcome this. But first, the main systems that we are using is, of course, ProZorro, National Electronic Procurement System, very famous one worldwide. It's a fully online public procurement platform, and collaboration also of civil society, I would say, environment and professional procurement people that ensures open access to public procurement, all tenders in Ukraine. The transparency of public procurements allows the supervisory authorities, among others, to discover risks at the tender announcement stage. And there is also a special, more professional tool for the civil society and for registered users determining different red flags on different stages of the procurement. Then there is an e-data system, which ensures transparency of state expenditures, which is also an official governmental system where you can see who paid money to whom at what stage, for according to what contract, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, the online register of the declarations of officials, where online declaration of all property and incomes and expenditures of civil servants are disclosed. So all these systems, they are not the only ones, but they are the main anti-corruption, I would say, tools that exist and that everyone knows. They all have public API and machine processed accessible data, which allows all stakeholder bodies to obtain relevant data without submission of any inquiries. Just go online and receive what you want. Apart from that, there is also a legal act to determine what sets of data should be open, and it is updated every year. So we really have more than 600 data sets that have to be open in the open data format according to the order of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. But now I would like to tell a couple of words specifically about the Ministry of Infrastructure and how we use technology to fight corruption. Of course, infrastructure is a very expensive sector, I would say, whether we are talking about construction of roads, bridges, airports, railway lines, or whatever. All this requires big investments, and it's not a secret that if you want to find corruption, just follow the money. So of course our ministry is always under very big interests of civil society and journalists and media and so on and so forth. And in our sector, it is quite difficult to define bad management risk or low competence, I would say, from the real corruption risks, because the result is basically the same. It's poor infrastructure or not. We are not receiving the infrastructure object that worth the money spent for it, or it simply doesn't meet the requirement of users, of customers. It's not only in the transport infrastructure, it can be anywhere in the hospital, for example, where suddenly you have a new hospital, but the elevator can't really take the bed on the wheels because it's not wide enough. So the results of bad management and corruption risks and corruption actually by itself are more or less the same. And in transport, we have also a big variety of manual work of people who can cause corruption. So that's what we are trying to do. Now we we are trying to give less access for the manual interference of the human factor in all the transport services that we provide. By this, we have created an electronic transport portal, which allows business to receive all administrative services from the ministry and also on our subsidiary institutions. For example, it's licensing of road transport, booking permits for international transportation, which is a very risky thing here in Ukraine, or was very risky before this year. Services for seafarers, still under development, and also digital waybills document that we use for the transportation of goods. Also, we use the system of weight in motion facilities, because the very famous case, all media are about it, when we have heavy loaded trucks going through the road, and instead of paying penalty to the police, and special inspectors that we have, special inspections, they just pay a bribe on the place and leave. So therefore, we are now changing all human factors to automatic weight in motion complexes. So the system will weight the trucks automatically, and then without a man being on the road, the driver and the company will receive a penalty bill to pay if he's overloaded. So we are trying to use as less real inspection by human beings as possible. Also, we are trying to improve the performance of infrastructure project, because fighting corruption and punishing corrupted people is, of course, a big deal. But in the end, everybody is interested in proper infrastructure as well. Punishing people is not enough. So cost has helped us to develop transparent infrastructure portal, which is an open data portal, and it has an analytical real-time tool to do the analysis of all the road construction projects. This portal is updated on a weekly basis. That's why we call it real time, because it's updated automatically from the electronic procurement system that I mentioned before, and other sources, which is about half of the data that are there. And it's the database built in such a way that we have a lot of drop lists there, where the procuring entities which have to fill this information, they're using some kind online catalogs to choose about 35% of data more. So you can actually do the analysis of this data, because when you just type in something and one letter is different, or you have two spaces instead of one, then it's not possible to do the analysis of this data. So this tool is working online. It's absolutely publicly accessible, and it now has more than 10,000 road construction projects in there, starting from 2016. And there you can really see many things. You can compare the contractors' presence from region to region in the whole country, your top 5 contractors, who is falling down in price of contract very much, who is never falling down, who is working only with the same procuring entities, who is the favorite in some type of construction. You have lots of filters there, like type of road works, road categories, which are 5, year, period of the year, region of one of the 24 regions in Ukraine. So really lots of filters you can apply, and it gives you so many possibilities to do the real-time tracking of the project performance. And for this is, of course, a very good tool for civil society and media, but for the government, this is a tool that giving possibility to track the project implementation and identify risks, why some contracts are longer than others, why infrastructure projects have too many contracts in one project, because it's always a complex system. You have a project design, you have a construction itself, you might have maintenance, you might have 10 or 12 project designs on the same road following each other. This is a very often case in Ukraine to escape the trade on trade procedure on the ProZorro system and to go to the direct contract, for example. So we are following all the mismanagement things and are trying to improve our policies based on this analysis, because it's much easier when you have a system that is tracking in the same manner the performance of the contracts, starting from the planning phase, how financed were approved to this contract, and then finishing with the accomplishing of the project and maintenance. And then one final tool I want to tell you, which we are still developing, is a good example from Korea, the clean construction system. A couple of years ago, Seoul government came here and shared with us the experience of a really high-tech system where you can really, for example, compare the project design with the implementation in terms of materials, prices, working force involved, equipment involved, everything. And it really gives you a possibility to red flag compared what was planned to do with what you are doing in reality. Because infrastructure projects might last 10, 15 years in average. And of course, for the civil society, it's quite difficult to monitor the successful implementation and corruption risks also of this project. But when you have this data accumulated, it really gives you a lot of advantages to do the analysis and plan your work properly. So probably this is a short overview that I gave, and now I give back the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Natalie. So let's now turn to Jim. Jim, as a governance specialist for the World Bank, you have researched corruption for many years. What do you see as the promise of technology for controlling corruption? Jim.
Thank you, Ed, and thanks to the other speakers as well. So the promise of technology is enormous. The potential is enormous. And we heard several really good applications already in very concrete terms from the other panelists. If you think of the traditional building blocks of efforts to control corruption, including things like strengthening transparency, accountability, streamlining processes, strong enforcement, et cetera. There are technological applications for all of these. These could be things like online portals, online tax payments, reducing the need for that sort of face-to-face interaction, which can be an opportunity for corruption. The digital paper trail, quote unquote, that exists when you implement things like e-procurement systems and so on can greatly facilitate the identification of problems after the fact and streamline processes as you go along. Digital tools like electronic filing of income and asset declarations, which are often used as part of the anti-corruption toolkit, can also make that process smoother, cleaner, faster, and more amenable to cross-referencing with databases to find problems. at the World Bank. My colleagues are also supporting some work to use advanced analytical tools to look at masses of procurement and other public administration data. It's something called PROACT. This is being developed. So there are many applications. At the same time, we need to pay attention to what they called in the World Development Report 2016, digital dividends. They called these the analog complements. So that if you want to achieve the dividends from the digital age, you need to pay attention also to skills, to institutions and regulatory framework, and to the infrastructure, the backbone, et cetera. So part of our role at the World Bank is in our support to countries in their efforts to improve services for citizens, control corruption, improve governance, et cetera, to try to think about not only the sort of end state about what a great high-tech future world looks like, but how to get there and what are those other building blocks. The last thing I want to mention is that given the sort of wide range of different types of applications of technological tools to controlling corruption, it's helpful to step back and take a look at what my colleagues working on GovTech emphasize is the whole of government approach. So to put the citizen at the center and think about the whole of government approach to using digital tools to improve governance. And among those applications are those for controlling corruption. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Now we have some time for questions. So I have a few to get us started, and we can also take some questions from those who are tuning in. So please keep posting your questions. In the interest of time, may I ask all our panelists to please keep your responses very brief to the questions that I'll be posting now. So maybe a minute or two would just be fine. So let me start with you, Natalie. You moved to your current position in government from one of civil society oversight. What can you tell us about the transition? What did you learn once you made that move to government?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very interesting question indeed, because I have never worked before as a civil servant, never in my life. So that was a big change. And I must admit that first 3 months I was living in complete shock. And it was very difficult to adjust to new rules of the game, because being a civil servant, of course, gives you very limited time to react, lots of public attention, lots of requests from the higher government officials. And of course, the main thing that you have to make sure that the processes are ongoing. The results are like on the second priority. The main thing is to make the process run, and this is completely different from everything I ever done before.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. So let's now go to you, Emma. Some of the technologies you mentioned have dual use. They can be used for positive social change, but also for more nefarious uses. How do you approach and mitigate that?
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, we're building tools, right? And they can be used, assuming they're they can be used by people for means of control. I mean, I'm sure terrorists use Microsoft Office, right? And I think that's not quite what we're facing with Alice, but the kind of technology we're building is open source, is available to a whole array of people to use. And it's something we're really conscientious about. I'd say we really lean into providing extra support and engaging those working in the public interest to make sure they can use our tools. And we do that honestly by having a private Slack channel with people who can apply to join, and by not spending time working with others who approach us. I mean, that said, the tools we're building definitely have use cases within the financial sector, within due diligence communities, and there's probably a financial model in there but I think there's some ethical considerations for us around that kind of thing. But this comes back to like the fundamental debate also around encryption, right? Like there are ongoing calls for governments to insert backdoors into different kinds of encrypted communication so that law enforcement can gain access. I mean, honestly, that's something we are incredibly scared of within journalism, because people are working in environments where honestly they don't trust law enforcement or security services, right? So I think there's no easy answer to any of these things, and all you can do is be thoughtful and intentional and try your best and kind of think about the risks.
Thanks, Emma. Alan, so there is a question for you. Okay, you discussed the journey to more technological adoption, and you described, I think, 3 stages to do that. But I think a lot of people will look at what you presented and the stages, and then they will be scratching their heads and say, how do I really get started on that journey? So, how?
Yeah, no, that's a great call out. And as I sat and listened to the other panelists, there's a lot of impressive solutions that are out there, relatively sophisticated based on what I've seen. And I'm sure that it is overwhelming to some members of our audience. When I look at it, and it builds on a comment that Jim made, it's a good reminder that tech is just part of a multifaceted solution to go after corruption, to fight corruption. And our focus of the panels is really on building these tech-based solutions. But to get started, focus on the specific risk and the associated business processes around there, so you can see how tech might actually be part of the solution. Map the business process and controls. Then really focus on what you consider as the risk. Take your investigations, your audit findings, your subject matter experts, and identify what the themes and schemes are that you're looking for in your business, in your organization. How does the anti-corruption or the corruption risk actually manifest itself? And then figure out what signals you might be looking for. That leads you back to the sort of data that you may want, that you may need. I see a separate question about how much data do you need to stand up these systems? To stand up the sort of systems you've heard about today, yeah, they consume a lot of data, but just taking data that you may have in an Excel spreadsheet and learning how to visualize that, to slice it and dice it to create a chart, that's the first step on the journey. In many ways, that is data analytics. To build a system that is as sophisticated as Microsoft's, where we actually apply machine learning, yes, you do need a lot of data, lots of transactions, lots of third parties. But still, you can start with just an Excel spreadsheet. Start with one database and gradually build it up. What I found out is if you provide or create some powerful, actionable insights, other people are going to want to contribute their data. Your peers in your organization are going to want to contribute because they see the power of it. And that's just how we've built it over time.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Let me now go to Jim. Jim, in your remarks, you highlighted the promise that technology can bring. But also there are risks or downside to technology, or actually the use of technology for corruption. So what do you see as the main risks?
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, it's a good question. So I think one set of risks is around losing sight of those analog complements. Keeping in mind that you still need a sound legal framework. Technology can be great for transparency. It's even greater if there's a very clear framework for what is required to be public information, how it is to be disclosed, et cetera. So I think that's one risk. A second risk is that I think that there's a chance. We often hear about the digital dividends leading to possible digital divides in terms of those who are tech savvy and have the means to take advantage of the economy and those who don't. And there's a kind of an application here as well. So if you think of using digital tools for something like either providing information or collecting feedback, grievance redress systems, complaints, that sort of thing. If you move exclusively to a digital format, then people who may not be might not have the skills or might not have the hardware to take advantage of that can be kind of left out. We saw it's not about corruption or governance, but we saw with the move to online schooling, suddenly we had to think, okay, it sounds like a great idea, but not everyone has the internet connections or the computers, and school systems had to adapt to that. And I think for the applications related to governance, that's also a potential risk. Just one more kind of category of risk I'd mentioned is the risk that that some of the either the applications or development of the infrastructure, allocation of licenses, et cetera, could itself be susceptible and weakened due to corruption or capture. If markets are captured, if the procurement of big IT systems is tainted by corruption itself, then that would be a risk. You could end up with lower quality, higher costs, et cetera, and we wouldn't be able to take advantage of the digital opportunity for controlling corruption. And I did want to quote, this was a quote, I'm not sure the original source, but our managing director used it at the IACC last year, that digital tools are not a silver bullet, but a golden opportunity. And I think that's a good way to characterize it.
Thank you, Jim. So, Alan, there is one question I want to pose to you here, coming from Microsoft. So, we have this question from from one of the audience. What problems arise as governments are more reliant on the use of ICT? For instance, digital media deteriorates, software changes, and hardware becomes obsolete. So, is there a risk for the government?
Yep, and so Natalie may be closer to this one because I can give the Microsoft advantage of the perspective of the advantage of storing your data in the cloud and digitizing your data. But I don't work on that on a day-to-day basis. Natalie, have you faced those sorts of challenges?
Well, we face a lot of challenges. Obviously, that's normal. If you don't face the challenges, you don't work on this issue. I would say so, because the more you do, the more challenges you face. But the main challenge, and I think that's for every system that we develop everywhere, is the reliability of data. If you really want to go for it, want to be 100% sure that these data are reliable. For the business modeling, it's less risky, but when you talk about people's life and destinies, that's really a costly mistake.
Okay.
Thanks, Ed. One thing, just to build on some of the risks or some of the challenges that Jim was mentioning. A couple things is we're always focused on the privacy and the security of the data. We operate in a framework within what we can and can't do with the data. But then there's the big one of a misunderstanding of what technology can and can't do. Jim mentioned that it's not a silver bullet. When we look at the solutions we're delivering, it's really about allowing humans to make better decisions. Whether it's entering into a contract, whether it's entering into a relationship with a third party, getting an understanding of what's happening with their tax dollars. The machines don't make those decisions for us, but they help us make more informed decisions. And so as part of that is ensuring that you have transparency and interpretability in your data, in your algorithms. Again, help people understand what data is being used, how it's being used, and what the expected outcome may be. So thanks.
Thank you. So we have about a minute for one additional question, and this will go to Emma. Emma, what are the broader applications for a tool like Aleph, especially within the public sector?
Yeah, so I think Aleph, something like Aleph is incredibly useful for any organization, body, enterprise that is dealing with large quantities of different kinds of data, right? So if you're trying to pull together spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations and Word documents and a bunch of emails, and you're trying to make sense of them, then that is what Aleph was built to handle, right? And so there is, I know there's some obscure bit of the UN that is running at their own Aleph instance, and they work on like sanctions in North Korea, right? I'm not entirely sure what they're up to with it, but there's lots of examples like that, or think tanks that are using it. And so within government, there's, it would also apply. And there are a lot of similar kinds of tools that are available from the private sector. We just run an open source version of it, so it's obviously free to use, though it does require having a certain amount of technical capacity in-house to maintain it long term.
Okay, thanks, Emma. So colleagues and participants, I am afraid that's all we have time for today. Many thanks to Natalie, Alan, Emma, and Jim, and everyone that tuned in to today's event. Just to give you a quick summary, I mean, we've had a very rich discussion, and it is impossible to summarize everything that has been said in a few minutes. What I would like to do is just to give you a few standings. We have heard from the panelists that tech can be a solution to addressing corruption challenges. And we have seen examples of how that can be used on the side of the infrastructure, how it's being used in the media organization like the one that Emma is working with. We also had the panelists also identifying that there is also the risk that technology can be misused. Also, listening to the panelists, I think it is clear that building a tech tool to tackle corruption is a journey, and we have to start from somewhere, or any organization will have to start from somewhere, building the foundation, as Alan explained, to then go to solution-centric, and then going transformational. One thing that is clear from the presentations is that data is very important, and data has to be in the form that can be used. And so in the form that you can connect the dots. Development of approaches to use the data to tackle any particular challenge that we are interested in is also very important. Also, it's important for us to note that tech is just part of the multifaceted solutions that we need to tackle the issue of corruption. There are also the complementary analogs like the legal framework that panelists referred to.